I was curious about the struggle with understanding God. You had many answers that you put out, and I was curious what the struggle was on the path to those answers, and what the struggle is that you still see that happens. And then I want to jump into that from the communications perspective.
That's good. If we don't put all of Judaism into the context of a relationship, then we'll never really understand. It's all relationship. From beginning to end, it's a relationship. And that explains almost everything once you get that context. Right? In a relationship, you start off being new to each other. I don't want to say strangers, but new. You get to know the surface personality. You get to know things about each other. And then as it grows, it becomes more personal, more intimate, until it becomes inseparable, essential, whatever. Historically, our relationship with God began at Mount Sinai, or began with Avraham. And in stages, in increments, it became more and more personal. So this is one of the things that really makes a huge difference. God gave us the Torah at Sinai in writing, 5 books of Moses. It's the written Torah. The rest was oral. The Mishnah and the Gemara and the sages and the arguments and the customs and the... Why wasn't it all given in writing? It's because some things are more personal than what you put in a journal. No disrespect to a journalist. But personal things, you don't just reveal lightly or prematurely or when the relationship is young. So all the things that God told us through the later sages are the more personal stuff.
So let me stop you right there, because I've just learned something from you that I want to be able to elucidate here. You talked about written and you talked about oral, which means, as Jews, in the way that you've explained this, you are underlining the importance of written, of writing, of the written word, and how it is essential to the Jewish soul. And then you're also underlining the oral, which means the relationship of talking to one another, of hearing, because oral, and gets back to something that you talked about yesterday, the listening and the hearing of one another. And those two things are huge struggles, because I know as a writer, I wrote a book last year called Sorry Millennials, We're Not Dead Yet. That's doing really well on Amazon. Anyway, but I know as a writer, the struggle for writing. And I know as a teacher, the struggle for listening, as a parent and as a husband and everything else. So address those struggles.
You're talking about the conflict between the written and the oral?
Well, or there's a struggle between the written and the oral, and there's a struggle, because I am curious, Rabbi Friedman, the struggle that you went through to be able to produce the knowledge that you communicated yesterday.
I'll give you a little personal historical background.
Okay.
In 1970, we started a program in Minnesota for college women, adult women, mm-hmm. because there were schools, programs for men who wanted to catch up on their Jewish learning. They didn't want to sit in classroom with kids. Mm-hmm. So they started programs for them in Israel and in New York, but there was nothing for women. And in those days, men and women were different. Remember those days? When men were men and women were women.
I got the whole inference.
Yeah. So we started a program for the women.
Yeah.
Now, women came to this program in the 70s, in the 80s. There was no starting point. They came to find out what Judaism is But they also needed to know why they should care. And it was at that stage where nostalgia was starting to fade. You couldn't actually say to most of these students, you couldn't say, well, your grandmother lit Shabbos candles, you should too. Mm-hmm. My grandmother? She was on the beach. She wasn't lighting candles. She wasn't even observing Yom Kippur. So the nostalgic approach wasn't working anymore. What's the starting point? How do you open the conversation with somebody who says, why? Why should I even care? And I realized that everything I learned in yeshiva was not helping me. I mean, I can quote you this and I can quote you that, but their reaction is going to be, so why should I care? But it's written. There are 10 commandments written. So it forced me to dig a little deeper into the written. What am I not hearing? I'm reading, what am I not hearing? So the separation, the distance between the written and the intuitive couldn't last. It didn't work. If you're not reading with a little bit of intuition, you're not hearing. So instead of thinking of it as a text, you have to think of it as a love letter. And when somebody's writing you a love letter, there is so much more that is unsaid in the words than words can convey.
So let me jump into this for a second. One of the things I teach in the class on creativity, and I actually, in front of these students, of which a third are Chinese, and they're from all over the world, and then there's Americans of every ethnicity, is I teach something called the undulating space, which goes right into what you're saying here, as a methodology of creativity, where I explain to the people a model of how disparate, different situations, oral and written, enter into a space and they cause a tension between them. And I explain to the students that they have to jump into that tension and they have to stay there. And then they have to find the commonalities between these disparates. And then they can create, once they've been in the tension and they struggle to find the commonalities, they can then create ideas and concepts of excellence in depth. Then I say to them, let me explain to you where this model came from. I didn't make it up myself. It comes from what's called Bereshit in the Torah. And I explain I'm Jewish, and that's when I come out as this big Jew. And I said to them right at the beginning of Bereshit, it tells you that there is heaven and earth. And then it tells you there's tohu vavohu. And then creation comes about. I said, so the model has been sitting there all the way through. Now, as a communicator, what I want to be able to throw at you is to say, we've got an audience of people here, and how do we communicate to Jews and these people the importance of the struggle in them finding their relationship with God? And you're communicating it right now, actually beautifully, saying, this is between my being a rabbi trying to bring Jews closer to Judaism, understanding nostalgia didn't work. And I had to jump into saying, what did the written tradition and the oral tradition say, and how do I bring this together, and how do I struggle through this?
So it's interesting that in the written, in this Torah scroll that is written by a scribe and so on, one of the rules that makes it a kosher scroll is that there must be space between the letters, the white space. And then there's a philosophical debate. What is a letter? Is a letter a white space with a black interference? Or is the letter the black space surrounded by white? The white space is the intuitive. So to give a quick example. God called to Avraham. We teach it to kids. Vayemer Hashem, and God said, El Avram, to Avram, lech lecha, go to you, come to me, whatever. Those are the words. It's written. memorize them, ingrain them in your mind. Let's say that in two different ways. God spoke to Abraham. God spoke to Abraham. God spoke to Abraham. I'm saying exactly the same words. And it changes the meaning completely from dry, objective, sterile words to a living relationship. The previous Rebbe's father, when he was reading the words, and God said to Avram, he started to cry. Tears of joy and pleasure. God spoke to my grandfather? How is that not?
So wait, talk about the white space. You're talking about the black letters.
Well, I'm the mystic, right?
Right.
The mystic is the one who reads between the lines. Anybody can read the lines, but reading between the lines. So if a wife says to her husband, I love you, what does that mean? I hear the words. What does it mean? I'm in trouble? Now I owe her, so what does it mean? Where is this leading? Where is this coming from? What is it expressing? It's sterile without the mystical part. So really, it shouldn't even be called mystical. It's personal. Take an objective statement and bring out the personal. And you do that intuitively, of course. You don't have to be a genius. You have to be sensitive. Mm-hmm. So how do you translate, and this is really, I think, powerful and beautiful. How do you translate Anochi Hashem Elokecha? The first words of the Ten Commandments. God is introducing himself to his people for the first time. What does he say? He says, I am God your God who took you out of Egypt. I am God your God who took you out of Egypt. I am God your God. What's he saying? Hi, pleased to meet you. Let's translate it with a little bit of intuitive sensitivity. I, God, am yours. That's the correct translation. Because that's what he's saying. I am God. So you think I'm distant and no, I'm yours. So what reaction or response did that elicit in the people who were intuitive? They said, whatever you want.
But there's something else here. There's an issue of identity, that God identifies himself. So what does that mean and what does that say for our own sense of identity and our need to identify ourselves, either to ourselves or to other people, or as Jews, or as citizens of the world, or as the many different roles that we play? Is there an imperative to identify?
Of course there is, but that's just the tip of the iceberg. I was listening to Rabbi Sachs when he was chief rabbi of England. Mm-hmm. He says, why are people so lonely? He says, I discovered how lonely people are. I was speaking at some event, he says, and this woman came over to me and said, do you remember me? I was at your lecture 3 years ago. So how desperate can you be for recognition? Mm-hmm. How lonely are you that you want somebody that you listened to in a lecture with 3 years ago and you're desperate for me to remember your name? The name can be very powerful. Your identifying yourself can be very powerful. Or it can fall flat and sterile and be disappointing and frustrating. So absolutely, introduce yourself. But I got to hear much more than just how to pronounce your name, or it's not really an introduction.
Okay, you just identified yourself before as a mystic. So I want to ask you two.
That was a joke.
But it is an identity that you carry in the Jewish and the Chabad world, okay? And the name of this session, when David was going to be, was between the mystic and the journalist, okay?
That's the humor in it.
All right, so hold on a second. Let's talk about it. Talk to us about your identity, either your own identity or the world's identity of you as a mystic, as well as I want you to combine this with the word love. I'm putting them on the spot.
That's a very good question.
Right.
That is really something. Naturally, the word love is supposed to change the tone of the conversation from objective to subjective. You introduce yourself, you say, my name is, and part of my reaction has to be, so what? What do I care? So that's your name and that's what you do. Good for you. What do I care? And yet the name, or even the title, is supposed to be a bridge that kind of connects us. As I was mentioning, the soul in heaven doesn't have a name. It doesn't need a name. But when we come down into a body and we are separate entities, now we need a name to create a bridge between us. So if you tell me your name, my reaction should be, so what? What does that have to do with me? What does that mean to me? What are you telling me besides your name when you introduce yourself? Are you saying you want me to know you? Are you saying, I just introduced myself, would you please introduce yourself so I can get to know you? There's so much unspoken in the spoken. And if I'm not...
space.
The white space.
The white space.
And if I'm not tuned into that, we're not making any connection. And communication means connection. So the way Hasidus explains speech in general, what's the difference between thought, speech, and action? This is really interesting. Thought means you according to me. When I'm thinking about you, it's my way, what I think of you. I don't care if it's true. I think you're a wonderful guy. Maybe you're not. I don't care. This is me thinking about you, so I can think whatever I want. And don't bother me with the facts. So when I think of you, it's you in my world according to me. Because that's what thought is supposed to do. Speech means I need to step out of myself a little bit and meet you at least halfway. Because communication means I need you to understand what I'm saying. If you don't understand what I'm saying, I'm not communicating. So I can't talk to you in my language. I'm speaking Yiddish.
Yiddish.
How about Hungarian?
Magyar. You know.
So if I don't speak in your language, I'm not really communicating. I'm not talking. I'm babbling. So I have to speak in your language, even if it's not my favorite language. So I got to compromise myself a little bit, step out of my reality into your reality so that you can understand. On the other hand, what am I telling you? The weather? That's not communication.
You just taught me something that I should have been obvious about. Here I'm a communication professor, and I speak Hebrew, and I know that the word in Hebrew for communication is tikshoret, which comes from kesher, which means connection, and I never stopped to think about that before. So thank you for that.
So the connection is complete only if I'm expressing something about myself. Mm-hmm. If I'm talking about mathematics, or I'm talking about the weather, I'm talking about the news, it's not communication, it's just information. So to communicate, I got to tell you what I feel, what I know, something about myself. But I have to say it in your language. So it's me and you, 50-50.
So let's move to something else about communication here. Now, today, communication is in its own struggle. There is the human communication, and we all know that technology has moved hugely into the communication business. All of us are communicating every moment of every day. Everything that we send out on our cell phones, whether it's texts, whether it's emails, whether we're using social media, whatever we're doing, it's communication. And I know that you are savvy of this to a certain point as well. What is the white space between the personal communication of me and you and this world of communication that we have entered into?
So if we were going to be precise, can you meet somebody online, get to know somebody online, and marry them online? You cannot. Because the truth is that the information highway is a fantastic tool for information. It is not communication. Not at all. We do not communicate online. We miscommunicate online. It's only good. The technology is good for information. A beautiful story. This guy says to his mother, old-fashioned mother, "It's amazing, the new technology. Anything you want to know, I can find it on Google." She says, "Nah." It's, "No, I'm telling you, anything, whatever you want to know, I can Google it, I'll find out in a second." And the mother says, "No, that can't be." He says, "Good. Ask me a question and I'll show you." She says, "Okay, how is Aunt Zelda feeling?" See? If you really want to communicate, not Google. So it shouldn't be called communication. It's just sharing of information. If we really want to communicate online, you gotta leave a lot of white space. It's like these people who have the annoying habit of, you know what I'm saying?
I understand what you're saying.
No. The habit of,
oh, God.
You know what I'm saying? At the end of every sentence. Yes. You know what I'm saying? You understand what I'm saying?
No clue what the hell you're talking about.
Obviously, you don't think anybody understands you, so you have to stop and ask constantly. You know what I mean? You know what I mean?
Wait, I got a better one for you. It's kind of like I told them last night, and like I was talking and I told them it's kind of like this. I listen to my students say it and I say to them, "You're communication majors. Can you speak without the word like and kind of? And does like and just there's also something else in communication. I don't know if you are all aware of what's called the upspeak that goes on in this new generation, where they constantly end their sentences in a question as if they can't make a definite statement. And so I have this going on in the classroom too, and I say to them, you are communication majors, you have to make a statement. So there's a lot of communication inferences, intonations, uncertainty that's going on today that hasn't gone on in the past in quite the same way.
I had an experience with a room full of teenage girls, came to the Beis Chana program, and it was an amazing thing. There were 40 girls, and they were all talking at the same time. So I said, "Excuse me, who are you talking to? If you're all talking, who are you talking to?" They thought they were texting.
Well, this is a problem in the generation.
So listen to what happened. A couple of days of this, and it was impossible to communicate. So on the third day, I said, it might be a nice idea. Have you written a letter to your mother? Everybody take out a pencil. You remember pencils, right? Take out a pencil on a piece of paper and write a letter to your mother. You don't have to mail it. You can tear it up, but write a letter to your mother. And they all did, which was surprising. I didn't think they would do it. They did. The next day, they were transformed. They were listening. They were normal. They wrote a letter to their mother, and something changed. Abriva ledemame. What happened? They became rooted in reality. They didn't None of them sent the letter. None of them sent the letter.
Wait, I'm going to ask you something you just said. That you said they became rooted in reality. Harav al-Mekubal, what is reality?
Reality is, I am someone's daughter,
Mm-hmm.
and I have a mother. I can't talk to her.
Mm-hmm.
She doesn't understand me,
Uh-huh.
but I'm not a mushroom. I have roots. This is my family. This is my mother. I'm somebody's daughter. That reality was missing. They never identified themselves as a daughter.
Wait, talk about the importance of family relationships as reality and not white space.
It's one of the 10 commandments. Honor your father and mother. Why is that so important? I like to joke about this. It's the one commandment you don't have to write in stone because your mother will always remind you. Other mitzvahs may have to be recorded in stone, but this one, and yet it's one of the 10 commandments because it is so essential to life.
Mm-hmm.
Kirk Douglas became a more observant Jew when his son, Michael, asked him, where is Grandpa from? And he couldn't remember which shtetl in Russia he was from. And it shocked him. How alienated can you don't remember where your father is from? And he realized this can't be. And he became more traditional. He started doing what his father did. Because you can't cut your lifeline and hope to do well. We need to know our ancestors. By the way, you've got to talk to your children about your parents. This generation gap is a horrible, destructive thing. You have to quote your parents, quote your grandparents to your children, to your grandchildren. Otherwise, they think life began with them.
Mm-hmm.
Spoiled brats.
Yes. It's like my kids used to think that the grocery store was where vegetables were grown. I want to turn to you folks. Let's talk about communication. You've now been listening to us for half an hour, and you're hearing several themes being spoken about here. Family and white space and writing and oral tradition and struggle and all these things. What does it mean to any of you? I believe that we have to engage our audiences. So I'm going to let you guys think for a minute. And then let us see hands go up and people speak about. Please identify yourself too as you're speaking and talk loud enough.
Steve Servant from that great mecca of Jewish life, Columbia, South Carolina. The sages caution us to be wary about entering the garden being the realm of Jewish mysticism. And at least until we're worthy of entering that garden or prepared for it. And I have always been very hesitant, despite a lifetime of study, inadequate, but still a lifetime of study. I've always been hesitant to enter the garden. But after all, Hasidus and Kabbalah are in that garden. So how would you caution us to approach Hasidus and Kabbalah when many of us probably should not be dabbling in that garden?
There was a time when people were very, very smart. And if they studied the Kabbalah, they would understand and maybe come to the wrong conclusion. We can study the Kabbalah all we want. We will never come to the wrong conclusion because we don't understand a word it says. So we're safe. There's no danger for us. But also, Hasidus paved some roads and put up some road signs so that if you want to enter the mystical part of Torah, you're not on your own and you won't get lost. Just follow the signs. Before Hasidus, there were no signs and there were no paved roads and you could get really fablunged. So now it's not dangerous to learn Kabbalah. But if you want to really, I don't know that the subject here really was the Kabbalah. You weren't allowed to study it unless you were over 40 and a scholar in all other parts of Torah and particularly sensitive, even among the sages. Not everybody was allowed to study it. Now, everybody is reading Kabbalah. Everybody. Anybody. It's translated into English. Now when you read it, you have to wonder, what was the secret? What does it say that's so dangerous? It was never dangerous. It was a secret because of how personal it is, not because it was classified. The more personal something is, the more of a secret it is, even after it's revealed. So if I tell you a secret because it's something personal, the fact that I've told you doesn't make it any less personal. And so I expect you to treat it that way. That's why I entrust you with my secret. Now, if I tell half the community my secret, it's still a secret.
I'm going to facilitate here. Take 2 more minutes because I want to be able to give people chances to ask questions. You got 2 more minutes to answer that question. Go ahead.
So the secret of Kabbalah is really God's more personal, more sensitive, more romantic message. And there was a time when people couldn't handle it. To hear that God is really obsessed with you and dependent on you and vulnerable to your freedom of choice and anticipates your mitzvah desperately, there was a danger that people would take it lightly, lose respect, because, we were so macho and what, God really needs me? Then I don't respect him anymore. So only the really sensitive were invited to hear God's more personal side. And that's what we started talking about. With the oral law, God whispers more about himself to one of the sages than he would write on parchment for everyone to read. So the oral law really gets closer to him. And with each generation, it gets more and more personal. So now that we're comfortable with God being personal, now the Kabbalah is not a secret anymore. Yes, he desperately needs you. Does that inspire you or does that turn you off? What I find is it really inspires.
Great. Next question. Anybody else have one? Okay, let me ask you something as we wait. You started out speaking about you used the word intimacy. I want you to talk about intimacy between man and God, Jews and God. And then we'll talk about intimacy between people.
Man being non-Jews?
Yeah.
In a nutshell.
Humans and God.
Right. In a nutshell, God created the entire world that is made up of mineral, vegetable, animal, and human. He is the creator of it all, and they are all his creations. Then God gave birth to the Jewish people. So human beings relate to God as their creator, their maker, the source of their life, the master of their universe, and they serve him accordingly. We serve God as his children. It's personal, it's subjective, and he is more invested in this relationship than we are, which means simply he needs us more than we need him. Like parents and children.
Okay, last question. Talk about the presence of God in the intimacy between human beings.
I put a story form. I get a phone call a couple of years ago. A guy on the line says, I don't want to give you my name. I live in a small town in Oregon. That's in the United States.
I live on the West Coast.
Uh-huh. And there are no Jews in this community where he lives. He is Jewish, born Jewish, but he's been practicing Christianity for the last 36 years. He's a retired psychiatrist, and now that he's getting older, he says, what can I do to feel connected to my people here in this town? So obviously I said, get a pair of tefillin. You'll put on tefillin every morning. You'll feel connected to your people. Strapped in. He says, I can't do that. Every time I try to do something Jewish, I've had a bad experience. So I said, nobody's Jewish because it's been a good experience. If you do what God needs from a Jew, you feel like a Jew. If you do what God needs from a non-Jew, you'll feel like a non-Jew. He says, God needs? I'm not familiar with that. So I said, I'm getting a little impatient with this guy. He sounds a little funny. I said, God is infinite, right? He says, oh, yeah. I said, so God is infinitely patient, infinitely kind, infinitely knowing, infinitely... He says, yeah. I said, well, then he must also be infinitely vulnerable. So he starts to laugh. He says, God is vulnerable. God's almighty. Now, he's a retired psychiatrist. So I said, doctor, are you suggesting that vulnerability is a weakness? And he got totally flustered, and he hangs up the phone. A couple of days later, he calls back. He says, I don't want to give you my name. I'm the guy from Oregon. Where do I get tefillin? I said, why all of a sudden? I'm going to give him a hard time. I said, why all of a sudden? He says, I can't accept Christianity and the message of Christianity. I can't accept it. I said, after 36 years? He says, my professional background doesn't allow it. I said, but you've been doing it for 36 years. What changed? He says, let me explain this to you. In our profession, we know that if a man, for example, says to a woman, I love you more than anything in the world. Oh, you're not interested? Your loss. In other words, he's not vulnerable. So I don't need you. I love you. Hey, if you're not interested, doesn't hurt me. Your loss. We know in our profession that his claim of love is not love at all. It's manipulation. He says, Christianity says God loves you very much. Oh, you're not interested? Go to hell. Forever. He says, I can't accept that. If there's no vulnerability, there's no love. So this is why we have JLI. I think the purpose of Chabad House, JLI, the teachings, the online, offline, whatever it is, the objective is, how do we communicate to each other something bigger than the two of us? So it's certainly not just information that is irrelevant to life. It's also not about me, and it's really not about you. It's where can we touch the divine? What can elevate us to a truth, to a significance, to something meaningful, which of course means personal, that is bigger than the two of us?
Great.
Who do we both love? Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you. Okay.
Thanks for watching. Click subscribe and hit the notification bell below for daily pearls of Jewish wisdom.